Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back to the Monday Intelligence Report with shrinkformen.com and avoiceformen.com. Today is Cinco de Mayo, 5th of May, 2014. I am Dean Esmay, as always, Operations Manager for A Voice for Men. With me, as usual, is the tempestuous, toothsome Dr. Tara Palmatier. Say hi, Dr. T.
Hi, everyone. I thought you were going to introduce Paul.
You know, no, he just goes last every time from now on. That's it. That's the new rule. Screw him. And also Paul.
Hi, everybody. Did I say too much?
You pretty much did, yeah. So shut up now. You just go away. All right, so we have three interesting stories here today. I think I'm going to go ahead and ask Tara if she would like to start with her story.
Sure. It's one of those, did they pay money to do this research to find out what we already know? It's a New York Post article titled Involved Fathers Are the Antidote to Helicopter Parenting, which should actually be helicopter mothering. And it's just citing, the research that most people who follow the show have probably already read, that children who have involved fathers do better in just about every aspect of their lives than children who don't, particularly children who have enmeshed helicopter mommies. Who do not allow their children to take healthy risks, who do not encourage independence or autonomy, and
okay,
basically...
now, hang on a minute. I don't know what a helicopter mommy is.
Do you remember the Time magazine with a woman breastfeeding like an 8-year-old boy?
Yeah.
Hard to get that image out of your mind.
She's always there. She's always there hovering like a helicopter. Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Okay.
Hovering like a helicopter, like a police helicopter, chasing down a criminal on foot. They're ever present. It takes hands-on parenting to a new level. Helicopter parenting, in my opinion, I think delays healthy maturation in childhood.
And what they're saying is that dads are necessary to
that fathers typically will encourage children to take healthier risks, to get up on their bicycle without the training wheels and let them fall down and learn from their mistakes.
Yeah, actually, and anybody who's studied the dynamics of fatherhood knows that's how it usually works, isn't it, right? Mommies are protective and daddies are the ones who saying, you only broke one leg, get back up and keep running, right?
I don't think it's quite that.
I can't wait for the minors on that one. But I will say, I think the important thing here is that the helicopter mothering or helicopter parenting, to me, is a misnomer. This is helicopter interference in the lives of their children. Most of these women go to harangue school officials about the C they got on a report card versus the B, and they want proof of why it shouldn't be a B, and they push and they push and they push. It is not that they give a damn that much about what their kids are learning. They care about what the end result is on their record, and they want to cause as much trouble and as much interference as they can in order to improve that and to make it look better. It's not just about protecting the kid, it's also about protecting the image of the mother having a really smart kid. And you're right, it does extend into areas of, oh my God, no, wait till you're 22 and then we'll get you a bicycle with training wheels. There's some of that plays into it, but a lot of what I think of when I think of helicopter mothers are the ones that are down in the school administration offices shrieking in outrage because somebody marked a test answer that was wrong with a red X and took points off of their grade, and they want that fixed. What changes that, what stabilizes that, indeed, is the involvement for fathers. As a matter of fact, if fathers were more involved, if they hadn't been so removed from the scene of most children in this society, the term helicopter mother or helicopter parent probably would not even exist. But because there would be a father in the home confronting the child about their accountability, about what their responsibilities are in school, and helping them get the test question correct the next time.
I think that's part of it. I also think that helicopter mothering did exist, but a couple of generations ago, instead of pop psychologists writing about it as an acceptable form of parenting, it would have been described as unhealthy enmeshment.
And I think we would probably mostly agree, although there are certainly fathers out there who are not good fathers and just go ahead and disappear. I think a lot of us would agree that the real problem at root in society is that fathers are being thrown out of their kids' lives. And we have this notion that you can be a father by seeing your child every other weekend and one night a week for 4 hours for dinner every other week on the off weeks, and no.
And writing a check.
And writing a check, and then you get called a Disneyland dad because the few times that you are, the little time you are spending with your kids, you want to make it fun and positive. But when you're in that position, you have no control over things like how the child's doing in school. You don't. What are you going to do? You're going to see your kid every 2 weeks, and it's going to start with a lecture on how bad they're doing in school? No, it doesn't work that way.
Well, and a lot of times, some of the mothers in situations like that, the fathers want to instill a sense of discipline in the children and have healthy boundaries for them and limits. And if they don't like it, they call their moms and they go back home because mom is more interested in being the more loved parent. And so when the fathers actually do try to take, sorry about that, outside. Speaking of helicopters.
Was that a black helicopter?
There's one hell of a helicopter mom up there. The helicopter
She doesn't like what you're saying.
I actually planned for that to happen. Intelligence Report now has a huge budget. Sorry, but so I work with a lot of men who are trying to teach their kids to be more responsible, to be age appropriately mature, and their exes undermine them at every chance. Well, you don't have to have rules like you do at dad's house, at mom's house, and you see the kids manipulating and exploiting that.
Yeah, there have been studies that compare outcomes for kids that don't have involved fathers versus those who do, and it's rather stunning what the difference is. I've even read some about the outcomes of kids of single fathers, and while they tend to do okay, it does go on the flip side. Sometimes single fathers are too strict on their kids. So I mean, both parents matter. That's the bottom line. So we've got yet another study just confirming an involved father in a child's life is an absolute necessity. And what gets me is some people seem to think that this is like, I don't know, fatherhood is some kind of social construct. And no, this is how we evolved as a species. We're a pair bonding species, and the hallmark of a pair bonding species is that both parents are involved in the nurturing and rearing of the offspring. And that doesn't mean whether you're talking about Homo sapiens or penguins. That's the hallmark. And children need both their parents. They just do. Mm-hmm. And it's appalling that it's controversial to say that today. Like you're supposedly shaming single mothers. Well, you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and say it. 9 out of 10 single mothers ought to be shamed. I mean, 1 out of 10, maybe I'm being, I don't know, am I being generous? Am I being stingy? I don't know. 1 out of 10. A tragedy happened. Couldn't be avoided. Okay. 9 out of 10 single mothers, yeah, they ought to be ashamed of themselves. I'll say it right now. Anybody want to disagree with me?
No, I think single motherhood sucks. Overall, culturally, if you look at what's happened with the level of gang involvement in children, school failure, all these other psychosocial factors by which we measure an individual's adjustment to the society that they live in and expectations of living. There is no doubt in my mind, raising children without fathers is shortchanging them and hurting them and hurting their chances at a successful adjusted life. But hey, you know what? What the courts feel is like that what mom wants and needs is what's important, so they screw the kids alongside everybody else in that system. And then, of course, now we have a bunch of social scientists everywhere, and I use that term loosely, scratching their heads saying, gee, why are so many boys falling out of school? Why are so many boys in trouble?
I think that's also compounded by the fact that the majority of teachers in the elementary and secondary school systems are female. So they're not getting positive male role models from anywhere.
Often females who have been indoctrinated into the modern gender ideology of feminism and who are preaching girl power and you go girl and shuttling boys off to the side and marginalizing them as they enter the education system.
Mm-hmm.
These are powerful influences, and if we think we're going to replace that with what I call a bitch on blades instead of a helicopter, we're not going to service these children in this way.
And what's worse is that there are feminist social scientists who are trying to educate men who are involved in their children's lives that they shouldn't parent like men, shouldn't parent like fathers, but should parent like women.
This, and one of the outcomes, although there's more than one factor, one of the outcomes that we know that single motherhood, let's just go ahead and say non-involved fathers, because there are a few genuinely irresponsible fathers who just boost out and are gone. But in general, the problem with not having fathers around, women have to be held accountable for a lot of that too. In any case, we know one of the outcomes of that is a much higher chance of being involved in the criminal justice system for both boys and girls, and that's going to let me segue into my own story.
So, before you segue, let me add one thing to that, if you'll allow me to, Dean.
Yeah.
I want to assert, we don't have, obviously you're right, there is, in any population, there's going to be a certain percentage of losers, of deadbeats. Anyone with a brain is going to recognize that. But I think we have a very difficult time coming to understand or measure the actual numbers of fathers that are failing their children. When you have a system that is designed to push fathers out, to tell them they're useless, to tell them to write a check and shut up, there is a percentage of those men that eventually comply and say, okay, screw it, here's the check, they're your kids, I'm not going to have anything to do with this, I don't have any authority anyway, and my visitation's been sabotaged over and over again, and they give up. And if you look at their behavior, totally out of context, if you look at just what they're doing at the time 5 years down the road, you may look at that guy and say, man, what a horrible father. All he does is write the check and tell him not to bother me with details. But we don't know the backstory to a lot of those men who have been told you're useless, you're no good, you're a threat to the family, you need to go away and write a check. And if you argue with us, by the way, we'll throw you in jail. That explains a lot of so-called uninvolved fathers in my book, and we don't have any valuable or reliable way to measure how many of those are men who are just useless and how many of those were men that were made to be useless.
I don't see why not. Why can't, for instance, I think it's the U.S. Census Bureau has a statistic that 82% of the time mothers are awarded primary custody. Why can't they include questions on their surveys for the fathers? How often do you see your children? Are you the custodial parent? Is that by choice? Did you fight for custody? Do you not see your children as much because the mother blocks access? All of those things could be very easily responded if they asked the questions.
That's right.
All you have to do is get somebody in government to ask.
We hear every day from a voice from men, every day from men who want to be involved with their children and for one reason or another are not being allowed to. And while we occasionally run across one or two that it's like, well, I can see why that happened to you, for the most part, it's almost never somebody other than a man who desperately wants to be in his children's life and is not allowed to be.
Exactly, and I have. It's hard to do, and I hate doing it. It's heartbreaking, but at the end of the day, the advice I give has to be practical and not founded in fantasy and advising men to further the abuse that they're suffering from the family courts and their exes. And there have been cases where I don't say that I can't say that I agree with it, but sometimes I think the healthiest choice a man and father can make is knowing when he is fighting a losing battle, and sometimes he has to stop fighting in order to preserve himself and his sanity and his well-being.
The only thing I'd advise a man who makes that choice, and I understand some have to make it, would be to document somewhere for your children in case they ever come looking.
I do. I encourage them to keep journals, to create a private Facebook page and a private blog where they can document all of this stuff. And if and when the kids reach out, when they're out from their mother's thrall, they can say, hey, you know, I think sometimes a father can fight and come out okay, but you really have to know what your local family court system is like, because sometimes it doesn't matter how much evidence you provide, you just will not prevail, even if there is egregious abuse by the mother. And in those cases, I think it's foolish to continue to impoverish yourself and fight against a system that isn't going to help you or the children. And I think sometimes the best thing a father can do when it comes down to that is to walk away and get himself healthy and whole, in the off chance the kids will come back to him.
I'm going to put up a comment. One, there was a question from someone in the comments about whether or not that we were seeing their comments, and the way I'd like to answer that is by saying that we are. But in order, just before we seg into our next story, I'll go ahead and put this up and read it. I had a great male role model growing up, my father, but on TV I always saw how men were portrayed as inferior. I felt lesser to women despite having a great father. There are many influences, and that's certainly a good point to bring up. So we wanted to answer that. Say yes, we are. If you have questions or comments that you think are relevant, put them in there. We will try to get them up. But I wanted to use that for an example because I thought it was also a really good point to make.
It is a good point, especially because, and I find that the older the person is, the less likely they are to take that particular comment seriously. Because, all right, at 48, I didn't see too much of that kind of crap growing up, but I don't see how somebody who is, let's just say, especially under the age of 30, didn't grow up bombarded with those negative male images and stereotypes about men and fathers all over them in the media when they were growing up as kids. There were still positive male role models and positive portrayals of father on TV when I was growing up. I don't see how anybody under the age of 30 can say that that's something they commonly see. Instead, they see what that commenter, I'm sorry, I didn't catch his name, said. And I don't see how anybody can think that doesn't affect a 3, 4, 5-year-old boy and affect him for the rest of his life. People just sniff and laugh and say those media portrayals don't matter. Well, bullshit. Yeah, they do. So now my segue is a little more clumsy, but one of the negative outcomes we know from single motherhood is that a person, especially a male, but really either boys or girls, of single mothers, is a much higher risk of being incarcerated. Now, this, my story has to do with the fact that the National Academies Press has recently released a massive volume called The Growth of Incarceration in the United States. I'd like to get a hold of a copy of this because it's $75. typical for academic publishing. It says something that we pretty much already knew, but I'll go ahead and read the basic description. After decades of stability from the 1920s to the early 1970s, the rate of imprisonment in the United States more than quadrupled during the last 4 decades. That's the rate, mind you, not the total number. The total number would be even higher, but the rate has quadrupled over the last 4 decades. The U.S. penal population of 2.2 million adults is by far the largest in the world. Just under 1/4 of the world's prisoners are held in American prisons. The U.S. rate of incarceration, with nearly 1 out of 100 adults in prison or jail, is 5 to 10 times higher than the rates in Western Europe and other democracies. The U.S. prison population is largely drawn from the most disadvantaged part of the nation's population, mostly men under aged 40. Now, they go into something there, too. They also mention how they're disproportionately minority. I really want to go look at those stats, though, because the last I checked is that if you equalize for income levels, education, and, oh yes, the presence or absence of a father in the home, most of what we call the racial disparity disappears in terms of whether or not you're likely to wind up in jail. In other words, the problem, while nobody's going to deny that racism exists, Barack Obama's kids are not going to be at much risk of going to jail, even if their parents, if he gets divorced. Single motherhood is one of the causes of this, and what astonishes me is that, it's always like, here it is, we're going to get further down into it before we say mostly male. Yeah, we ought to actually be saying what it really is, which is 95% male, mostly poor males from bad backgrounds. And mostly, by the way, males of single mothers. I'm sorry if that makes anybody angry. It's the truth. I mean, hell, my mother-in-law used to be an educator in the prison system even back in the 70s when it wasn't quite this crazy. And she used to try and, her job was as a teacher. She was called a special ed teacher, but her job was to take, 19-year-old men who still couldn't read functionally and teach them reading, writing, and arithmetic. And, I just remember asking her once, how many of those grew up without fathers in the home? And she's like, oh, I don't know, probably 9 out of 10 of them at least. We are incarcerating a huge part of the human population, and it's like we keep, mostly male, like that makes it, somebody comment, because I'm being completely incoherent now.
Well, I think there's another side to this too, Dean. There's another side to one of your points, and then there's another side to the big picture. One, when you look at factors like fatherlessness and income disparities, when you were talking about equalizing the racial distribution in prison, I do think we have to consider that factors like income and factors like fatherlessness have already impacted minority communities at a disproportionate rate before we even start measuring them after they get in prison. So part of that is a pre-existing condition. The effects of the drug war, which results in a lot of people being in prison, is they're not carrying out. I don't live in it. I wish I did, but I don't live in a neighborhood in Houston called River Oaks, mainly because you have to have a couple of $1 million to even buy a lot in that place, much less build a home. And I can assure you that there is cocaine running from one end of that neighborhood to the other for every young, successful couple that wants it. And I can also assure you that cops are never there knocking down doors and serving warrants, no-knock warrants. It doesn't happen. What we do to wage a drug war is we go into poor neighborhoods. That includes poor white neighborhoods, yes. But in terms of proportion, I recommend to anybody that some of the best reading you'll ever see is Parliament of Whores by P.J. O'Rourke. And he writes about his experiences in riding in police cars during the drug wars, which he termed very adequately as a war of minorities. That's where they're kicking in doors and laughing about it. That's where they know people don't have the money for decent attorneys to defend their constitutional rights. That's where they can go bust heads and do whatever they want to do with impunity, and they're filling prisons with those young, primarily black and Hispanic young men, like it's nobody's business. Even the other side of that is the fact that incarceration itself, it's not an accident that we've gone from a stable prison population to quadrupling the number of people we're putting in prison. It's because we privatized the prison industry, and it's become a business to incarcerate people. There is profits to be made. There are payrolls to be created.
And these businesses make campaign contributions to congressmen and state legislatures.
Exactly. And so what's the best way to fill those prisons? One, obviously, with people that can't adequately defend themselves. That would include large groups of the fatherless. That would include large groups of minorities and other disadvantaged groups that can't mount a defense to what's happening to them. We have a business in the United States at prisons. It's not a criminal justice system, it's a criminal justice enterprise. And we need to start waking up to that fact. But yes, one of the most sure ways to increase your risk drastically of ending up incarcerated is to remove the father from the home, which we are doing like nobody's business.
Mm-hmm. In fact, it seems to parallel. It started first in minority and poor communities, and it's just spiraled outward from there. All I can say is it's shameful. I mean, we need to do something about it, and we could devote a whole show to the abuses of the prison industry and what happens to young men.
And we probably will. We should.
We probably should, but I just wanted to note that this important report has come out. I'd like to get a copy of it, but I somehow doubt it's going to have any surprises in it. When are people going to think this matters? When are conservatives going to think it matters? To be honest with you, I mean, lefties annoy me on this one too, but on this one, there's certain. I'm sorry, left-wingers annoy me on a lot of these issues, but when it comes to this, they're right and the right is wrong. I've heard conservatives actually say what I consider frankly dumbass things like, yeah, we have less crime now because we lock people up at that rate. Give me a break. Don't tell me that we have less violent crime because we are putting pot smokers and crack users, mostly male, in jail at skyrocketing rates. BS. We're creating those kids. I don't know. Once again, I'm just ranting.
Well, by that logic, why don't we just incarcerate everybody? And there will be zero crime.
And there's plenty of other countries with lower violent crime rates than ours that don't incarcerate this many young men. And that's not even getting into the fact that if you put a young man in jail at the age of 18, by the time he gets out, what useful skill set's he going to have? Oh, yeah, we've actually made it harder for him to get employed. He's going to reoffend because he's got no useful skills anyway.
Well, according to that story we did a few weeks ago, that's the state's fault. And technically it is.
Well, yes, but it's only the state's fault when a woman is failed. When the 5% or so of the population that's female falls into that, then it's the state's fault. It's not. It doesn't matter when it happens to boys. Oh God. So we should do a prison episode one of these days. In the meantime, speaking of kicking fathers out of the home, we seem to have annoyed some people recently on A Voice for Men.
Impossible.
I don't know why people just seem to be annoyed by us sometimes, and I don't know why that is. We're so gentle. But, you know, it's hard not to laugh and just want to cry at the same time. Chris Mackney had a blog. He was writing about his struggles with the family court system, and as with so many men who are treated like garbage by the system, he finally checked out. He couldn't take it anymore, and he wrote and published a suicide note and did, in fact, kill himself. Now, the interesting thing there, I mean, I'm sure regular readers of A Voice for Men have already seen this, but in case you haven't, he published that suicide note. That suicide note appeared a number of places online, including the A Voice for Men forums. Not on our front page, but just in our forums. And, well, we saw it there. And like, well, I can't validate this. Like, you know, is this real? Is it legit? We don't know. So that's all we could say about it. Then we got a letter, didn't we, Paul?
Yes, we got a letter. It's not the first letter of this kind we've gotten, but it was certainly the most lengthy.
Yeah, and basically from attorneys purporting to represent Dinah McNee, claiming that she holds copyright on her dead ex's written materials, and that includes his suicide note, and demanding that we take it down, which all that did was validate for us, oh, the suicide note is legitimate, thank you. And we put that on the front page of A Voice for Men quite proudly, and because it was clear just from reading it, he wanted the world to read this note. There's just no question that he did. I mean, not only did he post it online in the first place, but you just read that heartbreaking letter. He wanted the world to know, and he wanted a message carried to his children.
And yes, for everybody's edification, we have received confirmation. The first place that that suicide note was published was Chris McNee's website, where he had made it a point to document for public consumption every trial and tribulation he'd gone through at the hands of the family court. So if there was any question about whether or not he wanted this read by people, that's been resolved.
Now, what's interesting there, well, I mean, it's interesting all by itself, and Ms. McNee, we have no respect for your wishes on this. Sorry, we really don't. In fact, you should be ashamed of yourself. But then we got a lot of attention. And we appeared like on Imgur. I think the 4chaners got a hold of it. Then the Raw Story picked us up and did a story. And actually, for the record, although we called them out a little bit, this particular piece that the Raw Story did, the piece itself, we had no real objections to. I mean, there may have been a thing or two we might have nitpicked, but really, the piece itself was responsible for journalism, I think. It was pretty straightforward and accurate reporting, for which I would have actually left a comment to thank the reporter for doing. Unlike previously, when the Raw Story did a story on us and grossly mischaracterized John Hemley. That was all addressed in an article that Victor Zen wrote for us, Sage Gerard. But what was interesting there is that when we tried to comment on the Raw Story, a number of us found that we were blocked. And that is quite interesting. I don't really care if the Raw Story wants my comments, but it's interesting to me. The way it happened is at first that Victor Zen, who'd been called out in the story, tried to comment and found he'd been blocked and had no idea why. I tried comment, and I've commented on the Raw Story once or twice before, sometimes even on stories that had nothing to do with the Voice for Men or men's issues. But I'd never done anything. I'd never gotten into a flame war with anybody. I'd never gotten into a fight with anybody. I had never sworn at anybody. Nothing. And this story appears, and I thought, well, I'll leave a little comment clarifying a certain point. Boom, it shows that I'm blocked. Victor Zen found that he was blocked. Other members of A Voice for Men community found they were blocked from commenting on this story before they'd even had a chance to say a word. Tell us more about this, Paul.
Well, I will say that I didn't try to comment, so I don't know if I'm blocked, but I would assume that I probably am. This goes into a bigger picture. I mean, Raw Story, what you described as a relatively balanced piece, and it was, we are going to give them kudos for that, but we're also going to qualify it by saying that that is the exception for Raw Story, covering anything to do with the men's movement. I think they had a bit of cognitive dissonance going on. I think as people that Well, it's interesting. They value free speech unless you're a member of ABFM who wants to comment on their article. But I think as a general principle, these are people that side or that err on the side of at least the press, or meaning them, having free speech. So they didn't have much choice but to do a relatively unbiased article, and then of course they opened it up for their commenters to tear us to pieces with impunity while our members could not respond. So I've given them a C- overall. I think it's...
Let me clarify one thing. I was giving kudos to that particular reporter for doing a great story. The raw story itself, the publication, oh my God, what a bunch of irresponsible scumbags who claim to be bastions of independent journalism, but apparently only independent of, I don't know, critical thinking.
Oh, and that reminds me, with the conference coming up in Detroit and tickets selling well, if anybody from Raw Story is wanting to come cover this, you are welcome. Press passes have already been issued. If you want in to cover the event, buy yourself and whoever you're bringing with you a ticket, and you can come in and do that. But you will not be issued a press pass as long as you are demonstrating yellow journalistic tactics and the refusal to allow dissenting opinions in your comments to anything written. Then we don't consider you a bona fide member of the press, and you will not be given a press pass to come in. That being said, this gets into a really bigger story. It also extends, I wanted to talk some just about media in general today. This, and in particular, the story revolving around Danielle Entremont of Queen's University. For those of you that aren't familiar with that story, she was allegedly assaulted in front of her home while she was in the midst of a lot of feminist activism, and had reportedly received threats by email from people who did not approve of her activism. This was all included in a story by the editor-in-chief of the Queen's Journal. I forget his first name, his last name is Matak. They really did set forth the narrative that what it's looking like here is that this poor young woman was attacked by an MRA for her activism trying to de-ratify the Men's Issues Awareness Group at Queen's University. Well, of course, we have a very strong interest in that, since we're a completely nonviolent group and we deplore the use of violence in the suppression of free speech. First, Men's Rights Canada, via Attila Benzer, issued a $1,000 reward for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the individual who had assaulted Entremont, if that did in fact happen. ABFM immediately matched that reward to make it $2,000. Just a few days down the road, the Canadian Association for Equality also came out with their matching funds of $1,000, so that the reward now is up to $3,000 for information leading to the arrest and conviction of anyone who assaulted Danielle Entremont. And I'll tell you, I've told them, and I don't mind saying here again and again, is that if it was somebody who identifies as an MRA who assaulted that woman, I want to see you in handcuffs in the back of a squad car, and I want to see the back of your stupid head getting smaller and smaller as the squad car goes down the street toward the jail. That's exactly what I want to see. I don't want anybody in the men's movement that thinks that we advocate violence, or that we would tolerate it, or that we would not throw you very quickly under the bus if you go in that direction. We've made that stand 1,000 times in the past, and our opponents know it, yet they continue with this kind of yellow journalism as done by Matak at Queen's Journal. Well, a couple of days ago, I got an email from Chloe Sobel of Queen's Journal, who said she had some questions for me. And of course, as I always do, I put the conversation on Skype and recorded it. And she asked 2 questions, and in my opinion, it's on my YouTube channel now, and it's on the website now. You can listen to it. It's 2.5 minutes long. In my opinion, what happened there was that she came snooping around for a soundbite to make us look bad, and when all she got was the truth, she lost interest in the conversation and went elsewhere. I posted that up. Like I said, you can listen to it now. Well, yesterday I was contacted by two different people from Queen's Journal. One is Matak, the editor-in-chief, who said he wanted to speak with me about my talk with Chloe Sobel. I wrote him back immediately and said, of course, send a number and I'll be happy to talk to you. I've not heard back from him since. But another gentleman from Queen's Journal has told me that they're going to do now a long feature-length piece on the men's movement and on what's happening. And I interviewed him yesterday for an hour and 15 minutes, which of course I also recorded. He asked a lot of questions, and good questions. But what is interesting here was at the beginning, he asked me if I was recording this and if I intended to post it online. And I'll let everybody know what I told him, is that entirely depends on him. If I got the sense, which I did not, that he was just fishing for sound bites, or if he had an ideological agenda instead of behaving like a journalist, then I would immediately post it online. I also told him that if he asked all these journalistic questions and listened to my answers and got them down, and then I turned around and saw a headline up about how A Voice for Men promotes violence against feminists, then I would post the entire interview. And I explained to him that we do this because we have come to view most members of the media, in particular members of university websites and media outlets, as liars and people that cannot be trusted. So we have learned from experience that in order for them not to just go forward mischaracterizing my words and the words of other people at ABFM with impunity, that we record them, and that if once they go out and make liars of themselves, then we can at least post the proof of what happened. He seemed okay with that. The interview, I thought he asked incisive, fair questions all the way through. He asked some questions that I think could have and should have been difficult. I mean, if he's a journalist, he's supposed to be asking the tough questions. I didn't have an issue with anything he asked. So what we're going to do is we're going to wait and see. If his article reflects any type of honest investigative journalism put up on the Queen's Journal website, I'm just going to dump the audio recording of the interview. If, however, I feel like that the interview is biased, that he has misrepresented my words, mischaracterized things, or slanted things unfairly, then I'm going to post the interview and in its entirety and unedited, and people will be able to listen to what was actually asked and answered and make up their own minds.
No, that's a standard policy for most of us. It should be a policy for every men's rights activist, to be honest with you, because the media, I mean, I've known guys going back 20, 30 years, like Harry Crouch will tell you how they've been horribly misquoted and, you know, gives it what seems like a good interview only to be savaged with what gets printed later on. I won't give an interview without recording it. I just won't. And my experience with that is very much, you know, and I don't think I can't recall having had the experience of being totally misquoted or quoted out of context or spun negatively, except by certain well-known man boobs types who will just spin anything they can.
2020.
Yeah, any real journalist. But what I have had happen, this happened, for example, with Emily Machar. This woman spends 40 minutes of my useful time on an interview, uses none of it. Not a single word of what I said, and then published a pretty stupid article in the New Republic. I mean, it had some points in it, but it was obvious she was afraid to use anything I'd said. Well, sorry, her interview went up months ago, and that's what's going to happen. Sage Gerard, Victor Zen, spent hours and hours and hours talking to somebody from Mother Jones, and they never wound up using it. And my guess would be because they didn't like what they heard from Sage because he wasn't a monster. And in fact, that most of what he said would be completely congruent with the stated values of a publication like Mother Jones, and they can't stand the fact that that might be true given that they are fundamentally a feminist organization. And the truth is, most of what we say is really hard to argue with on moral, intellectual grounds. It really is. So they'd rather not talk to us at all. So yeah, I won't. That's the only other reason I would put somebody's interview online. Either they've misquoted me, or they've wasted my time and not used my material, not used anything I had to say. Well, I'm at least going to put it out there so people can hear what I said. I'm sick of the media spinning false narratives about us. The biggest false narrative of all is that we're violent. And I'm really sick of that one. Really, really sick of that one. I had someone on Twitter saying we should stop whining about that. I'm like, no. When people spin a narrative about you that you're violent, and they keep doing it year after year after year, pretty soon somebody's going to take a shot at you just because they think you're a monster. It's not just hurtful. It's actually, at some point, it's dangerous. And feminists in particular, but a lot of people have just relied on this misandrous notion that angry men equal violent, dangerous, terroristic men, and it's bigotry. It really, really is. And I'm tired of hearing it. Well, I know what we have done is warned that if these cultural conditions don't change, we expect men to start getting more violent and start fighting the system directly. But we're the ones who are saying this could happen if we don't do something. We're strictly nonviolent.
I agree that we should not have to keep going out of our way to assert the nonviolence platform. I mean, it's been there 100,000 times, but we do need to respond to the false allegations because it does. It paints a target on innocent people that may be associated with this movement. You never know what nutcase is going to be out there these days. And they are. If anybody is promoting violence against anybody right now, there is a number of feminist ideologues and journalists that are doing their best. Everybody from Tori Shepard to Emily Machar are trying to paint a narrative to make us look dangerous. And there's always a nutcase in the crowd that would love to be the hero to take care of the dangerous people. And so not only do we need to object to that at some point, and I think some point very soon, we're going to need to start litigating it.
Yeah, I've gotten at least 2 threats of that. I've been informed at least twice that I deserve to die. I've run across comments from other people saying Paul Elam deserves to die.
Isn't James Buchanan beginning, or did he just threaten litigation and they recanted publicly? There was a publication. Or not James Buchanan. James
Buchanan.
Williams? Mike Buchanan. Good grief.
Mike Buchanan.
Who's James Buchanan? That's a president.
You're thinking of James Williams, I bet you.
Oh, okay. I'm.
Brits, they're all.
I'm mashing them up.
Buchanan, whatever. They all talk funny.
My apologies to both gentlemen. I'm very sorry.
Yeah, I think Mike. Yeah,
it's the Justice for Men and Boys guy is Mike Buchanan.
That's right. He was horribly mischaracterized, and he sent a. Well, it wasn't even exactly a legal threat, just in informing them, listen, this is a horrible misquote, and I'm going to investigate my legal options. That has more teeth in places like the UK than it does in the US, but still, we've been grossly lied to. I'm going to say it right now. Maclean's magazine in Canada, you lied to your readers about us. The Advertiser in Australia, you lied about us in your pages. You lied. Maclean's magazine, you lied.
ABC News 2020 lied to its readers about
They retracted, but it took them too long, didn't it?
The SPLC lied.
Yep.
To its readers.
Yet there are feminists who still repeat the lie. In that regard, I think of it as the feminist version of weapons of mass destruction. You know, there are still that was proven false, and yet there are people who still believe it, and so it persists. And just it was, I forget what the occasion was, but Jessica Valenti slammed some feminist blogger because she actually had a sympathetic article about the men's rights movement, and she's like, "You didn't mention the SPLC," and it's like, "Hey, dipshit, the SPLC admitted that that was false, but it doesn't matter to her. Just keep saying it."
Just like the wage gap.
Mm-hmm. Which just blew up in a big way. That was actually very enjoyable to watch.
And philosophically, this just points to a new era that we're in, and it may have been, it points to something empowering, which is that there has been a men's movement for 30, 40, 50 years. Actually, going on more like 100. But I mean, at least since the 70s, they've managed to silence people in the men's movement by lying about them. And now we're living in a world where basically you're a journalist and you come to do an interview, you're being interviewed at the same time. I mean, I noticed a little flip there. I don't know if you noticed it, Paul. You referred to yourself as interviewing this young man from the Queen's Journal. Technically, yes, he was interviewing you, but the truth is you were interviewing him too.
Absolutely.
And that's how it works.
I do that with all media. There is, the rules are changing. We say frequently around AVFM, we are the media. We don't say that without reason. We do have a platform. It may not be as big as ABC 2020. It's a damn sight bigger than Queen's Journal. And we have a platform to get out there. So when you talk to any of us, especially if you're a member of a media that has proven itself to be soundbite driven, whether or not those sound bites are true, and you've proven yourself to engage in yellow tactics in order to create hysteria in your readers and to lie about people because it's profitable to you.
Hi, Kathy.
And interview us. Come on and interview me. But if you think you're not being interviewed and scrutinized, if you don't think we'll get the truth about who you are out to the public, you need to catch up with the times.
Yep. Yep. So I'll be real interested to see. I have a feeling Queen's Journal is going to do a good job, but we'll see. We'll see. So we've gone on for 52 minutes now. I think it's about time we wrap this up.
I'm on battery right now, so yeah, I'm down to a little tiny red bar.
Okay, so we've got neat stuff happening. Stefan Molyneux is going to be joining us at the Detroit conference. So is speaking. Yes, please check out his Free Domain Radio website and his podcasts. Even if you're not one of the anarcho-libertarian types that he is, he's often at least thought-provoking, and on men's issues, he's gotten to be very, very, very thoughtful and insightful. So even if you don't agree with him politically on everything, look for what he has to say on things like abuse and suicide and things like that, because he's pretty darn on the money, and he's a fascinating character. We're honored to have him on board. We have Mike Buchanan is going to be speaking.
James Buchanan.
Huh?
James Buchanan.
No, Mike Buchanan. Mike Buchanan will be speaking.
We've already got Aaron Pitsey. Why are we getting so many Brits in there?
Yeah, no kidding. We've got a lot of people coming in. It's going to be a big deal. We even have one or two more announcements we are still not ready to make, but
I do have one that I am ready to make at this point to let everybody know. For any of you that were holding back because you knew that there was a minimum amount of tickets that we had to sell in order to make our break even and justify having the conference, we have passed that threshold. We are past the event horizon. The conference is happening. Also, to let you know, ticket prices have gone up slightly, but they will go up again as we get closer to the conference. First of all, the $259 price, which it currently is now, for getting into a conference that lasts a total of 3 days with 15 speakers and a workshop, is dirt cheap to begin with. Go out there and price any other professional or group conferences, and you'll see what I mean when you start looking at $1,500 tickets. But if you want to get your ticket at the reduced rate, and if you want to be able to book a room at the Doubletree Hilton, because we have a block of rooms set aside for people attending the conference to make your stay there easier so you can attend while in the same hotel, do it now. Don't wait. If you wait, the ticket's going to be more expensive, and we may have sold out of our block of rooms.
We may have sold out of tickets.
Sold out of tickets, and we have a cap on that we are not going to cross. So if you plan on going, if you were waiting to see if it was going to pull off before you bought your ticket, whatever, get in there this minute. Don't put it off. Don't tell yourself you'll get to it later. Go in there right now and get your tickets, get your room reservations, and be there in Detroit. This is going to be one hell of an exposition and one hell of a party.
First of its kind in history. Okay, well, if you are involved in an abusive relationship with a woman or think you might be, please be sure to check out shrinkformen.com. That's shrink with the number 4men.com, where there's plenty of useful articles, a very useful forum, and information on how you can get personal sessions with Dr. Cara Palmatier. It's absolutely worth it. Her website is dynamite, and the services she offers are dynamite. Please check out shrinkformen.com. And if you're interested in men's issues in general, please be sure to check out avoiceformen.com. We will be back here next Monday at the same time.
I will not.
We will have a special surprise guest instead of Paul Elam, and I will say
James Buchanan.
Yes. William Henry Harrison. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Say good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Cara's next lower third will be the Union Jack. You guys take care. Bye-bye.